The leather boot connected with Thunder's ribs at exactly 3:47 p.m., the sickening thud echoing across Sacred Grounds Diner's parking lot as Jackson Hawk Redstone threw back his head and laughed. The massive Brahman bull, all 1,800 pounds of mahogany and black muscle, staggered but immediately repositioned himself between the biker and the wheelchair-bound 8-year-old girl he protected. It wasn't laughter that froze every witness in place. It was the child's reaction. Ayanna Crow Feather wasn't crying from fear or pain. She was crying from recognition, her small voice barely audible as she whispered, "Uncle Hawk?" The teenage waitress's phone captured it all, already streaming live to TikTok as elderly customers rose from their booths, coffee cups clattering to the floor. Sarah Crow. Feather emerged from the restroom to find her great-granddaughter reaching toward the man who'd just assaulted their sacred guardian, the same man who'd promised her dying father to protect them both. "Security!" someone shouted, but Thunder never moved to attack. Who was this stranger Anna recognized, and why was a 2,000-pound bull showing mercy to the man who just betrayed everything sacred? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Sacred Grounds Diner sat like a weathered guardian at the crossroads of Highway 18 and Reservation Route 41, where the rolling prairie of Pine Ridge, South Dakota, stretched endlessly toward the sacred Black Hills. The establishment had served as neutral ground for 3 generations, its walls adorned with both dream catchers and faded American flags, where truckers shared coffee with tribal elders and tourists learned to pronounce Lakota correctly. Ayanna Anna Crow Feather had been coming here every Tuesday for strawberry pie since she was 5 years old, back when her small legs could carry her to the corner booth without assistance. Now, at 8, she navigated the world from a custom wheelchair, her paralyzed legs covered by a traditional star quilt her great-grandmother had sewn during the long hospital nights 3 years ago. The car accident on that rain-slicked stretch of Highway 44 had taken her parents, Michael and Maria Crow Feather, and left Anna with injuries that doctors said would never heal. What the doctors couldn't explain was Anna's bond with Thunder Walking, the magnificent Brahman bull who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers spoken in the old language. Standing nearly 5 feet at the shoulder, Thunder's coat gleamed like burnished copper touched with midnight, his intelligent brown eyes holding depths that seemed almost human. The service animal vest stretched across his massive frame bore patches identifying him as more than livestock. He was Anna's legs, her early warning system, her faithful guardian trained at enormous cost to detect the seizures that still threatened her life. Sarah Crow Feather, Anna's great-grandmother and legal guardian, had sacrificed everything for Thunder's specialized training. At 74, she worked 3 jobs: cleaning the tribal offices before dawn, manning the gas station during afternoon shifts, and caring for elders in the evenings, all to pay the mounting bills that insurance deemed experimental therapy. The mortgage on their family's ancestral land, sacred ground where her own grandmother had hidden from cavalry soldiers in 1890, now served as collateral for Anna's care. The old woman's weathered hands bore witness to a lifetime of struggle, surviving the boarding schools designed to kill the Indian, save the man, raising 6 children through poverty that would have broken lesser spirits, and now facing the impossible task of providing for a disabled great-granddaughter with medical needs that seemed to multiply faster than her modest income could cover. Thunder had been worth every sacrifice. In 3 years, he had never failed to detect Anna's approaching seizures, his massive body providing mobility support, while his gentle presence offered emotional healing that no medication could match. He understood commands in both English and Lakota, responding to Sarah's traditional words with the same precision he showed for Anna's whispered requests. The diner's owner, Robert Chief Clearwater, watched this unlikely family with eyes that held secrets of his own. His establishment had become their sanctuary, the corner booth unofficially reserved for the girl, the bull, and the woman who loved them both enough to risk everything for their survival. The rumble of Harley-Davidson engines shattered the peaceful Tuesday afternoon as 3 motorcycles pulled into Sacred Grounds Diner's gravel parking lot. The lead rider cut his engine with a sharp twist, his leather boots hitting the ground with practiced authority. Jackson Hawk Redstone stood 6'2" in worn combat boots, his broad shoulders draped in a black leather vest that bore no club patches, but spoke volumes about a man who lived outside society's comfortable boundaries. At 42, Hawk carried the weight of 3 tours in Afghanistan, in the premature gray streaking his dark hair and the hollow look that never quite left his eyes. The eagle and flag tattoo on his left forearm, identical to one that had once graced his best friend's arm, remained the only visible reminder of the brotherhood he'd lost in the desert sand. His companions, Tommy Bear Martinez and Rico Wheels Santos, flanked him like loyal soldiers, though their easy laughter suggested they saw this stop as nothing more than a break in their cross-country ride to nowhere in particular. Inside the diner, Anna sat in her usual spot by the window, methodically cutting her strawberry pie into perfect triangles while Thunder dozed beside her wheelchair. The bull's massive head rested on his front hooves, but one ear remained perpetually cocked toward Anna, monitoring her vital signs with the dedication of a sentinel who never slept. Sarah had excused herself to use the restroom, trusting in Thunder's vigilant presence and the diner's familiar safety. The atmosphere shifted the moment Hawk stepped through the glass door. Conversations dimmed as heads turned to assess the newcomers, the kind of automatic wariness that small communities develop towards strangers who looked like trouble. Elaine Rodriguez, the teenage waitress whose family had run the diner's kitchen for 2 generations, approached with menus and the practiced smile of someone who'd learned to handle difficult customers. "Just coffee," Hawk said curtly, his voice carrying the rough edge of a man who'd forgotten how to speak softly. "Black, 3 cups." His eyes swept the diner's interior with military precision, cataloging exits and potential threats in a habit that had kept him alive in hostile territory, but served little purpose in the peaceful confines of a reservation diner. His gaze lingered on Anna and Thunder, his expression shifting from casual assessment to something harder, more focused. "That's a hell of a big dog," Rico commented, sliding into the booth they'd chosen near the entrance. Hawk didn't respond immediately, his attention fixed on Thunder with an intensity that made Tommy exchange a worried glance with Rico. They'd seen that look before, usually right before Hawk's carefully maintained control snapped and someone got hurt. The bull was magnificent, Hawk had to admit, even as something dark and familiar twisted in his chest. Brahman cattle reminded him of the livestock they'd encountered in Afghan villages, gentle giants that had sometimes provided the only source of comfort for children caught in war zones. His unit had adopted a young bull calf in their final months, a gangly creature they'd named Courage, who'd followed them through the countryside like an oversized puppy. Courage had been standing in the wrong place when the IED detonated. The memory of the animal's final moments, the trust in its eyes even as shrapnel tore through its body, still haunted Hawk's nightmares. Every large animal since then had become a reminder of failure, of promises broken, and innocence destroyed. "Sir, I need to ask you not to stare at our customers," Elaine said quietly, setting down their coffee cups with hands that trembled slightly. "That little girl has been through enough without—" "Mind your own business, kid," Hawk snapped, louder than necessary. The words carried across the diner, causing several patrons to look up from their meals with disapproving frowns. Anna glanced toward the source of the commotion, her dark eyes taking in the 3 men with the careful assessment of a child who'd learned too early that the world contained more dangers than fairy tales suggested. Thunder's head lifted immediately, his nostrils flaring as he processed the elevated stress levels in the room. The bull's training had taught him to distinguish between normal social tension and genuine threats, and something about the lead stranger's posture triggered his protective instincts. Margaret Clearwater, an 83-year-old regular who'd been coming to the diner since before Anna was born, set down her coffee cup with enough force to rattle the saucer. "Young man," she called across the room in the tone of voice that had cowed 3 generations of misbehaving children, "that child and her companion are treasures of this community. Show some respect." Hawk's jaw tightened at the public correction, his hands curling into fists on the table's surface. The combination of caffeine, withdrawal from his morning whiskey, and the persistent ringing in his ears that had plagued him since his last concussion created a perfect storm of agitation that sought an outlet. "Treasures?" He pushed back from the table and stood, his imposing frame drawing nervous glances from other diners. "That's a 2,000-pound animal sitting next to a disabled kid. Where I come from, we call that a liability waiting to happen." The diner fell silent except for the soft country music playing from speakers mounted near the ceiling. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to pause as if the entire establishment held its breath. Anna's small hands stilled on her fork, a piece of strawberry pie halfway to her mouth, while Thunder rose smoothly to his feet beside her wheelchair. "That's enough." Chief Clearwater emerged from behind the counter, his weathered face set in lines of quiet authority. At 68, the diner's owner commanded respect through presence rather than volume, his silver hair braided in the traditional way, and his grandfather's turquoise bolo tie marking him as someone who bridged old ways and new. "You're welcome to your coffee, but you'll keep your opinions to yourself." Hawk's eyes fixed on Thunder, seeing not Anna's gentle guardian, but every failure that haunted his sleepless nights. The bull's calm alertness, the way he positioned himself protectively, the intelligence in his gaze, it all reminded Hawk of promises he'd made and kept, of loyalty that had been repaid with violence and death. "Tell me something, Chief," Hawk said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet that made Tommy reach instinctively for his arm. "When that thing decides it's had enough of playing pet, how many people you think it's going to take down before someone with sense puts a bullet in it?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished match, acrid and toxic. Anna's breathing became shallow, not from fear of Hawk's words, but from the stress of conflict that Thunder's training had taught him to monitor. The bull's massive head turned toward his charge, reading subtle signs that even the most advanced medical equipment might miss. Outside, Sarah Crowfeather's footsteps crunched across the gravel parking lot as she returned from her errand to the pharmacy next door, unaware that the careful peace of their Tuesday routine was about to shatter like glass. The confrontation erupted like a match thrown into gasoline when Hawk pushed away from his table and strode toward Anna's corner booth, his heavy boots striking the linoleum floor with deliberate menace. Thunder immediately positioned himself between the approaching stranger and Anna's wheelchair, his massive frame creating an impenetrable barrier while his intelligent eyes tracked every movement with the precision of a trained guardian. "Let's see what this circus animal really knows," Hawk said, his voice carrying the edge of a man whose demons had finally found a target. Without warning, he clapped his hands together in a sharp, explosive sound that cracked through the diner like a gunshot. The reaction was immediate and telling. Several elderly patrons gasped and clutched their chests, coffee cups rattling against saucers as startled hands trembled. Margaret Clearwater's purse tumbled to the floor, spilling prescription bottles that rolled under nearby tables. But Thunder didn't flinch. His ears flattened momentarily against the sudden noise, his muscles tensed with readiness, but he remained in perfect position beside Anna's wheelchair, his training overriding every natural instinct to react aggressively. "Good boy," Hawk sneered, taking another step closer. Real steady. But what happens when I do this? He lunged forward suddenly, stopping just short of Thunder's massive head. The bull's response was textbook perfect, a low, rumbling warning that vibrated from deep within his chest. Not quite a growl, but unmistakably a message. Still, he didn't move from his protective stance, didn't show teeth or rear up in the theatrical display that might have been expected from a frightened animal. Anna's small voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Please don't hurt him," she whispered, her words barely audible but carrying a weight that seemed to stop time itself. "Thunder's never hurt anyone. He only wants to keep me safe." The simplicity of her plea, delivered without tears or hysteria, struck something deep in the watching crowd. Elaine had pulled out her phone and was recording, her hands shaking as she captured what seemed destined to become either evidence of animal abuse or proof of Thunder's remarkable restraint. Chief Clearwater moved from behind the counter, his weathered hands reaching for the phone mounted on the wall near the cash register. "I'm calling the sheriff," he announced, his voice carrying across the diner with quiet authority. Hawk spun toward him, fury blazing in his eyes. "For what? I haven't touched the damn thing. Yet." The word "yet" hung in the air like a threat, and Thunder seemed to understand its implications. The bull shifted his weight slightly, ready to move in any direction necessary to protect Anna, but still maintaining the disciplined control that had cost Sarah 3 years of mortgage payments to achieve. Tommy Martinez stood up from their booth, genuine concern creasing his face. "Hawk, man, come on. Let's just finish our coffee and hit the road. This isn't worth it." But Hawk was beyond reason now, his PTSD-fueled rage finding perfect focus in the gentle giant who reminded him of everything he'd failed to protect in Afghanistan. "You know what I think?" he said, circling Thunder like a predator sizing up prey. "I think this whole setup is a scam. Rich family buying their disabled kid an exotic pet and calling it therapy, making the rest of us feel sorry for them while they get special treatment." The accusation was so far from the truth that Margaret Clearwater laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that cut through Hawk's rant like a whip crack. "Rich family?" she repeated, her voice dripping with incredulity. "Son, that woman works 3 jobs to keep food on their table. She mortgaged her grandmother's land, sacred land, to pay for that bull's training. They eat beans and rice 4 nights a week so that child can have what she needs to survive." Other diners began to murmur agreement, sharing fragments of Sarah and Anna's story that painted a picture far different from Hawk's assumptions. The gas station shifts, the cleaning jobs, the way Sarah's hands had aged beyond their years from constant work and worry. The medications that Anna needed, the specialized equipment, the mounting medical bills that no insurance would fully cover. "That bull isn't a luxury," Chief Clearwater added, his voice heavy with knowledge that came from watching the family's daily struggles. "He's the difference between that little girl living and dying. He can detect her seizures before they happen, support her weight when she needs to transfer, provide stability that no machine can match." Hawk's expression flickered, doubt creeping into his rage for the first time. But the momentum of his anger carried him forward, past the point where reason might have prevailed. He reached toward Anna's wheelchair, intending perhaps to demonstrate Thunder's supposed aggression by forcing a protective response. Thunder moved with liquid grace despite his massive size, stepping smoothly between Hawk's reaching hand and Anna's chair. No aggression, no violence. Just an immovable wall of muscle and determination that spoke of training so thorough it had become instinct. "Uncle Hawk, why are you being mean to Thunder?" The words hit the diner like a physical blow, stunning everyone into absolute silence. Anna's recognition, spoken in the clear, innocent voice of a child who remembered better times, transformed the entire dynamic in an instant. Hawk's hand froze in mid-reach, his face draining of color as memory crashed over him like a cold wave. Those eyes, that delicate bone structure, the way she tilted her head when she spoke, exactly the way her father had done during their long conversations about home and family and the life they'd return to after their tour ended. "Michael's daughter," he whispered, the words falling from his lips like stones. "You're Michael's little girl." Thunder sensed the shift in energy, the way violence had suddenly transformed into something more complex and painful. His protective stance remained firm, but his eyes moved between Anna and the man who seemed to be struggling with recognition and perhaps the beginning of understanding. The diner held its collective breath as past and present collided in the space between a wounded warrior and the child he'd promised to protect, but had instead forgotten in his own desperate flight from memory and responsibility. The recognition hit Hawk like shrapnel, memories exploding through his consciousness with the force of suppressed trauma finally breaking free. Michael Crow Feather's voice echoed from beyond the grave, speaking words that had haunted Hawk's sleepless nights for 3 years. "Promise me, brother, if something happens to me, you'll watch over my girls. Sarah's getting old, and Anna's going to need someone who understands what it means to fight." Hawk's legs gave out, sending him stumbling backward into an empty chair as the full weight of his failure crashed down upon him. The little girl sitting before him wasn't some stranger's spoiled child. She was the daughter of his best friend, his blood brother, the man who'd saved his life in the mountains of Afghanistan and died trying to keep his own family safe on a rain-slicked highway 3 years ago. "You don't remember me, do you?" Anna asked, her voice gentle despite the chaos Hawk had brought into her peaceful afternoon. "You used to visit us before Daddy's last deployment. You brought me a carved horse from Montana and taught me how to whistle like a meadowlark." The memories came flooding back with devastating clarity. Michael's modest home on the reservation, filled with the warmth of a young family just beginning to build their dreams. Anna, at 5 years old, her dark hair in pigtails, giggling as Hawk showed her how to cup her hands around her mouth to create bird calls. Maria, Michael's wife, insisting that Hawk stay for dinner and scolding him for being too thin. The plans they'd made for after their discharge, fishing trips, teaching Anna to ride, being the uncles she'd never had. Sarah Crowfeather chose that moment to push through the diner's glass door, her arms full of prescription bags from the pharmacy, and her weathered face already creased with concern at the unusual silence that greeted her. She took in the scene with the quick assessment of a woman who'd learned to recognize trouble from decades of raising children in an unforgiving world. The crowd of witnesses, Elaine still recording with her phone, Thunder in full protection mode, and Anna reaching toward a man who sat slumped in a chair like he'd been shot. "Jackson Redstone," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd known him since he was Michael's wild young friend, prone to bar fights and bad decisions. "I wondered when you'd finally show up." The absence of surprise in her voice told its own story. Sarah had been expecting this confrontation, perhaps even hoping for it, understanding that healing sometimes required facing the people who'd hurt you most. She set down her pharmacy bags and moved to Anna's side, her protective instincts warring with something that might have been forgiveness. "I didn't know," Hawk whispered, his voice breaking like a teenager's. "When I saw the bull, when I heard the girl, I didn't know it was Anna. I didn't know she was—" He gestured helplessly toward the wheelchair, unable to voice what he was seeing. "Paralyzed," Anna supplied matter-of-factly, with the calm acceptance of a child who'd had 3 years to adjust to reality. "From the accident. The one where Mommy and Daddy went to heaven." The simple explanation hit Hawk like a physical blow. He'd known about the accident, of course, had received the call from Sarah while he was deep in a 3-day bender at a roadhouse in Nevada, too drunk to comprehend the words she was speaking through her tears. By the time he'd sobered up enough to understand what he'd been told, the funeral was over, and his shame had convinced him that staying away was kinder than showing up broken and useless. Chief Clearwater stepped forward, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. "Elaine, put that phone away. Some things aren't meant for the internet." The young waitress complied reluctantly, sensing that something profound was happening but lacking the life experience to understand its full significance. "You were Michael's friend," Chief continued, studying Hawk with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his damaged soul. "The one who was supposed to help after he died." It wasn't a question. In a community as small as Pine Ridge, everyone knew everyone's business, and Sarah's struggle to care for Anna alone while battling medical bills and her own advancing age was common knowledge. The absence of the family friend who should have stepped up had been noted and discussed in the way that small communities kept track of such things. Thunder remained vigilant beside Anna's wheelchair, but his massive body had relaxed slightly as the immediate threat seemed to dissipate. His training had taught him to read human emotions as carefully as he monitored Anna's vital signs, and the shift from aggression to recognition hadn't escaped his notice. Still, he maintained his protective position, ready to respond if the situation deteriorated again. "I couldn't," Hawk said, his voice barely audible. "After what happened over there, after losing Michael, I couldn't face her, couldn't face any of you. I was drinking too much, fighting too much. I would have made things worse." Sarah's expression softened slightly, though her posture remained guarded. "So instead, you made things nothing at all. Do you have any idea what these past 3 years have been like? Watching that child learn to navigate a world that wasn't built for her, fighting insurance companies and medical bureaucrats, working myself into the ground just to keep her alive?" The accumulated exhaustion in Sarah's voice told the story of countless sleepless nights, endless paperwork battles, and the grinding poverty that came with raising a disabled child on a fixed income. Her hands, marked by arthritis and overwork, trembled slightly as she spoke, not from age but from the sheer weight of carrying burdens meant to be shared. "Thunder isn't just a pet," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she moved into familiar territory. "He's Anna's legs when she needs to transfer. He's her early warning system when seizures threaten. He's her emotional support when the world becomes too much to bear. And he cost $47,000 that I didn't have, paid for with money borrowed against land that's been in our family for 5 generations." The financial details struck Hawk like individual hammers, each figure representing a sacrifice he should have helped shoulder: $47,000 for specialized training, monthly maintenance costs for Thunder's care and ongoing certification, medical bills that insurance deemed experimental and therefore uncovered, the gradual erosion of a family's security because one man had been too broken to honor his promises. Anna reached out tentatively toward Hawk, her small hand stopping just short of his leather-clad arm. "Are you sick like Daddy was after his first deployment?" she asked, with the directness that children use to navigate complex adult emotions. "He used to have bad dreams and jump at loud noises until Grandma Sarah taught him the old healing songs." The question pierced through Hawk's defenses like nothing else could have. Michael had indeed struggled after his first tour, spending months learning to sleep through the night and startling at car backfires and unexpected sounds. But he'd sought help, had worked with tribal elders and VA counselors, had fought his way back to wholeness because he'd had something worth fighting for. "Yeah, kiddo," Hawk admitted, using the nickname he'd called her before the world fell apart. "I'm pretty sick. Have been for a long time." Thunder chose that moment to step closer, his massive head lowering until his dark eyes were level with Hawk's face. There was no aggression in the gesture, only assessment, the careful evaluation of a highly trained animal determining whether this broken human posed a genuine threat to his charge. After a long moment, Thunder snorted softly and took a step back, apparently satisfied that Hawk's danger lay in his capacity for self-destruction rather than violence toward Anna. "He remembers you," Anna said with wonder in her voice. "Animals remember kindness, even when people forget how to be kind to themselves." The observation was too sophisticated for an 8-year-old, but trauma had a way of accelerating wisdom even as it stole innocence. Anna had learned to read adult emotions with the precision of someone whose survival depended on understanding the mental state of her caregivers. Margaret Clearwater, who had been watching the exchange with the keen interest of someone who'd lived through enough human drama to recognize redemption when she saw it brewing, spoke up from her corner booth. "Jackson Redstone, I remember when you and Michael Crowfeather were barely 18, racing motorcycles through town and making your elders wonder if either of you would live to see 20. That boy saved your life more than once, didn't he?" The question was rhetorical. Everyone in Pine Ridge knew the stories of Michael's steadying influence on his wilder friend, the way he'd pulled Hawk back from fights that could have ended badly and steered him toward the military service that had given both young men purpose and direction. "Every day," Hawk whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "He saved my life every damn day, and I repaid him by abandoning his daughter when she needed me most." The admission hung in the air like smoke, acrid and honest. Around the diner, conversations had ceased entirely as the drama unfolded with the inevitability of a storm that had been building for years. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to witness the confrontation between past and present, between promises made and debts long overdue. Sarah studied Hawk's face with the careful attention of someone deciding whether to trust a man who'd already broken her family's heart once. "Thunder needs surgery," she said finally, her voice clinically calm. "That kick cracked 2 of his ribs. The veterinarian says it'll cost $8,000 we don't have, and without it, he'll be in constant pain." The words hit Hawk like a physical blow, the realization that his moment of rage had damaged the very thing that kept Anna alive. Thunder showed no sign of pain. His training would have taught him to hide weakness that might compromise his ability to protect Anna, but the knowledge of what Hawk had done sat in his stomach like acid. "I'll pay for it," he said immediately, though even as the words left his mouth he realized he had no idea how. His disability checks barely covered his own basic needs, and his savings had been consumed long ago by the alcohol and aimless wandering that had defined his post-military existence. "With what money?" Sarah asked, not unkindly, but with the practical directness of someone who'd learned that good intentions didn't pay veterinary bills. "You've been running from responsibility for 3 years. What makes you think you're ready to face it now?" The question was fair and devastating. Hawk had no answer that would satisfy anyone, least of all himself. But as he looked at Anna's face, so much like her father's, yet marked by struggles Michael had never had to endure, something shifted inside him. The self-pity that had sustained his 3-year retreat from the world began to crack, revealing underneath the man Michael had believed in enough to trust with his most precious treasure. "I don't know," Hawk admitted, his honesty raw and unpolished. "But I know I can't run anymore." "Not from this, not from her." Thunder moved closer again, this time positioning himself where both Anna and Hawk could reach him. The bull's massive presence seemed to bridge the gap between them, offering silent testimony that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds. Outside, the first police car was pulling into the parking lot, drawn by Chief Clearwater's call and the reports that were already spreading through the community's informal networks. But inside the diner, something more important than law enforcement was taking place. The tentative first steps toward redemption, forgiveness, and the possibility that promises long broken might finally be kept. The sound of sirens pierced the afternoon air as Deputy Elena Martinez pulled her patrol car into the Sacred Grounds Diner parking lot, her radio crackling with reports of an animal disturbance that had somehow escalated into a community incident. Through the diner's large windows she could see an unusual tableau. A crowd of witnesses, a massive bull standing protectively beside a wheelchair, and a leather-clad biker who appeared to be having some kind of breakdown in the middle of it all. Elena had grown up on the reservation, had watched Anna Crow Feather learn to walk in these same streets before the accident stole that simple joy from her young life. She'd also known Michael Crow Feather, had dated his cousin briefly in high school, and understood the complex web of relationships and obligations that bound the community together. When she stepped through the diner's door, her hand resting casually on her radio rather than her weapon, her presence brought a sense of official gravity to the proceedings. "Mrs. Crow Feather," she said, nodding respectfully to Sarah before her gaze swept the room, taking in the tense faces and protective postures of the gathered witnesses. "I got a call about a disturbance. Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" Before Sarah could respond, Elaine stepped forward, her phone still clutched in her hand despite Chief Clearwater's earlier request. "That man," she pointed at Hawk, "he kicked Thunder and was threatening to hurt him more. We've got it all on video. He was harassing Anna and being aggressive toward her service animal." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and Elena could see the way it divided the room. Half the witnesses nodded in agreement, their faces set with the righteous anger of people who'd watched a vulnerable child being terrorized. The other half, however, seemed focused on something else entirely. The broken man who sat slumped in the chair, his face gray with what appeared to be genuine horror at his own actions. "Is that true, Mr.?" Elena left the question hanging, her professional training taking over despite her personal connections to the situation. "Redstone," Hawk said, his voice hoarse. "Jackson Redstone. And yes, it's true. I kicked the bull. I threatened him. He stopped, unable to voice the full extent of his behavior in front of the child he'd terrorized. Elena's expression shifted as recognition dawned. "You're Michael's friend. The one who served with him in Afghanistan." It wasn't a question. In a community this small, everyone knew everyone's story, especially the tragic ones that left lasting scars. "Was," Hawk corrected, his voice bitter with self-recrimination. "I was his friend. Friends don't abandon each other's families. Friends don't attack the things that keep their daughter alive." Thunder had remained calm throughout the official proceedings, his training allowing him to distinguish between genuine threats and the formal protocols of law enforcement. But his attention never wavered from Anna, whose small frame seemed almost lost in her wheelchair as the adult drama swirled around her. The bull's massive presence provided a visual anchor of stability in a situation that had spiraled far beyond a simple Tuesday afternoon pie visit. Anna herself had grown quieter as more people arrived and the stakes became increasingly clear. Her great-grandmother had taught her that some adult problems were too big for children to solve, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Uncle Hawk's sickness was something she should understand. After all, she'd watched her father struggle with his own invisible wounds, had seen how the healing songs and traditional remedies had slowly brought him back from the dark places his mind visited. "Deputy Martinez," Margaret Clearwater spoke up from her corner booth, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd lived through enough community crises to recognize the important details. "This isn't just about what happened here today. This is about a promise that's been broken for 3 years, and maybe about finally making it right." Elena's eyebrows rose slightly. Margaret Clearwater wasn't known for dramatic pronouncements, and her words carried weight in a community that respected its elders. "What kind of promise?" Sarah answered, her voice steady despite the emotional upheaval of the afternoon. "When my grandson Michael was dying in that hospital bed, he made Jackson promise to help take care of Anna and me. To be the family we'd need when he was gone. She paused, her weathered hands folding carefully in her lap. Jackson disappeared instead. For 3 years, I've been raising a disabled child alone while he ran from his obligations. The admission brought a flush of shame to Hawk's face, but he didn't try to defend himself or offer excuses. The facts were stark and undeniable. He'd been given a sacred trust and had betrayed it through his own weakness and cowardice. Elena studied the situation with the careful attention of someone trained to see beyond surface conflicts to underlying causes. Domestic disputes on the reservation often involved complex family dynamics, broken promises, and the kind of generational trauma that couldn't be solved with arrests and court orders. This felt like something deeper, a community trying to heal itself by forcing a reckoning between its broken parts. "Mr. Redstone," she said carefully, "Mrs. Crow Feather could press charges for animal cruelty. A Thunder is certified as a medical assistance animal, which makes attacking him a federal offense. You're looking at serious jail time if she chooses to pursue it." The threat was real and immediate. Hawk's military record might provide some mitigation, but his PTSD diagnosis wouldn't excuse deliberate violence toward a service animal. Federal prosecutors took such cases seriously, especially when they involved children with disabilities. "I know," Hawk said simply. "I deserve whatever consequences come from this. But first, I need to make sure Thunder gets the medical care he needs. Those ribs I cracked aren't going to heal themselves." Chief Clearwater stepped forward, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. "There might be another way to handle this," he said, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who'd spent decades mediating community disputes. In the old days, when someone harmed another's property or caused injury through carelessness, there were traditional ways of making amends, ways that focused on healing rather than punishment. Elena understood what he was suggesting. Restorative justice had deep roots in Native American culture, focusing on repairing harm rather than simply punishing wrongdoers. It was a concept that had gained traction in modern legal systems, particularly for cases involving family conflicts and community healing. "What kind of amends?" Sarah asked, her tone suggesting she was open to alternatives but wouldn't accept empty gestures or easy solutions. Chief Clearwater looked directly at Hawk, his gaze measuring the man's capacity for genuine change. Traditional restitution would require the offender to provide care and support until the harm was fully healed. In this case, that would mean taking responsibility for Thunder's medical expenses and ongoing care until he's fully recovered. The proposal was elegant in its simplicity, but Hawk's face showed the impossibility of the financial burden. $8,000 for surgery, plus ongoing veterinary care, plus the daily costs of Thunder's specialized feed and maintenance. It would take years to pay off such a debt on his disability income. "I don't have that kind of money," Hawk admitted, his honesty painful but necessary. "I've been living day to day for 3 years, but I could work for it. There must be something I can do to earn what's needed." Tommy Martinez, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Hawk's got skills," he said, addressing the room rather than his friend. "Motorcycle repair, welding, construction. He's just been too messed up to use them consistently." Rico Santos nodded in agreement. "Before the war, before he got hurt, Hawk could fix anything with an engine. Had his own shop in Montana until—" He trailed off, unwilling to detail the downward spiral that had cost Hawk his business, his relationships, and very nearly his life. Anna had been listening to the adult negotiations with the focused attention of someone whose future hung in the balance. Finally, she spoke up, her young voice cutting through the complex discussions with startling clarity. "Uncle Hawk, do you promise to help Thunder get better?" The direct question, asked with a child's faith in the power of promises, silenced the room. Everyone understood that Anna's question went far beyond Thunder's medical needs. She was asking whether the man who'd once carved her wooden horses and taught her bird calls was still somewhere inside the broken warrior who'd attacked her beloved guardian. Hawk met her gaze directly for the first time since recognizing her, seeing in her eyes the same trust and innocence that had once made him believe he could be the man Michael thought he was. "I promise, Anna. I promise. I'll do whatever it takes to make Thunder well, and to be the friend your daddy wanted me to be." The words carried the weight of an oath, witnessed by a room full of people who understood that some promises were sacred, and that breaking them again would mean something far worse than legal consequences. It would mean the final destruction of whatever honor remained in a warrior's damaged soul. Elena holstered her radio, her decision made. "Mrs. Crowfeather, are you willing to accept Mr. Redstone's commitment to traditional restitution in place of formal charges?" Sarah looked at Anna, then at Thunder, finally at Hawk's face, searching for signs of the young man Michael had loved like a brother. "One chance," she said finally. "One chance to prove that my grandson's faith in you wasn't misplaced. But if you disappear again, if you break another promise to this child, I'll make sure you face every consequence the law allows." The agreement was struck with handshakes rather than signatures, witnessed by a community that understood the difference between justice and healing. As the crowd began to disperse, Thunder remained vigilant beside Anna's wheelchair, his massive presence a reminder that some bonds transcended human failings, and that love, properly nurtured, could survive even the deepest betrayals. The veterinary clinic's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Dr. Patricia Whitehorse examined Thunder's X-rays with the grim expression of someone delivering news that would fundamentally alter a family's already precarious existence. The massive bull stood patiently on the examination table, his training overriding any natural inclination to resist the prodding and positioning required for a thorough assessment, while Anna sat in her wheelchair nearby, her small hands clenched with anxiety that Thunder's keen senses immediately detected. "2 fractured ribs," Dr. Whitehorse announced, pointing to the ghostly images on the light board. "The breaks are clean, which is fortunate, but they're positioned in a way that makes simple healing impossible without surgical intervention. One of the fractures is pressing against the intercostal muscle, causing internal bleeding that will only worsen over time." Sarah felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. At 74, she'd faced more financial crises than she could count, but each one seemed to push her further toward the edge of an abyss from which there would be no recovery. $8,000 might as well have been $8 million. Both figures existed far beyond the reach of a woman whose monthly Social Security check barely covered basic necessities. "Without surgery?" she asked, though the answer was written in Dr. Whitehorse's compassionate but professional demeanor. "Thunder would survive," the veterinarian said carefully, "but he'd be in constant pain, and his ability to perform his service duties would be severely compromised. The muscle damage would prevent him from providing the stability and support that Anna requires for transfers and mobility assistance." The clinical explanation translated into harsh reality. Without surgery, Thunder would become just another expensive pet, rather than the life-saving medical equipment that justified his presence in Anna's world. Insurance companies and government agencies that had grudgingly accepted a bull as a legitimate service animal would use any excuse to revoke that status, leaving Anna vulnerable to seizures that could kill her without Thunder's early warning system. Hawk stood in the corner of the examination room like a specter of guilt, his presence both necessary and unwelcome. The promise he'd made in the diner felt hollow in the face of concrete medical realities and astronomical costs. His disability payments amounted to $1,200 a month, leaving barely enough for his own survival after rent and basic expenses. Even if he dedicated every penny to Thunder's care, it would take years to pay off the surgical debt. "Dr. Whitehorse," Anna said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of someone far older than her 8 years. "If Thunder can't work anymore, what happens to me?" The question cut through the adult's financial calculations like a blade, exposing the human cost of decisions that had seemed primarily economic. Without Thunder's support, Anna would lose her independence, requiring full-time care that Sarah's aging body couldn't provide. The seizures that Thunder detected with supernatural precision would become potentially fatal surprises, leaving Anna at the mercy of a neurological condition that had already claimed too much of her childhood. Dr. Whitehorse knelt beside Anna's wheelchair, her professional composure softening in the face of a child's direct honesty. "We're going to find a way to help Thunder," she said, though her eyes flickered with uncertainty when they met Sarah's gaze. "There are sometimes payment plans, grants for special cases." "How long do we have?" Sarah interrupted, recognizing the kindness in Dr. Whitehorse's words, but needing facts rather than false comfort. 48 hours before the bleeding becomes dangerous," came the clinical response. "After that, we'll be looking at emergency surgery with much higher risks and costs." The timeline was brutally short, a ticking clock that compressed 3 years of accumulated guilt and obligation into less than 2 days. Hawk felt the familiar pressure building behind his eyes, the same sensation that had preceded every breakdown, every violent outburst, every decision to run rather than face responsibility. But this time something was different. This time running would mean watching Michael's daughter lose the one thing that kept her alive. "I need to make some calls," Hawk said abruptly, pulling his phone from his jacket pocket with hands that trembled slightly. "Tommy, Rico, you guys still got connections in Montana? People who might remember when I used to be worth something?" Tommy exchanged a meaningful look with Rico, both men recognizing the desperation in their friend's voice but also something else, a determination they hadn't seen since before Afghanistan destroyed Hawk's faith in himself. "Maybe," Tommy said carefully. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that 3 years ago I had a motorcycle shop worth $40,000 before I drank it away and let it fall apart," Hawk replied, his voice gaining strength as a plan began to form. "I'm thinking there might be people who remember what I could do before I forgot how to do anything but feel sorry for myself." The idea was born from desperation, but carried a kernel of possibility. Hawk's reputation as a master mechanic had once drawn customers from 3 states. His ability to resurrect dead engines and transform rusted hulks into gleaming machines approaching the level of artistry. The business had collapsed not from lack of skill, but from the owner's inability to show up consistently, to maintain relationships, to function as anything other than a broken soldier drowning in memories. "Gary Ironcloud still runs that custom shop in Billings," Rico said, his voice thoughtful. "He always said you were the best welder he'd ever seen, could make metal do things that shouldn't be possible." Tommy nodded, pulling out his own phone. "And there's that rich collector in Bozeman. What was his name? Henderson? The one with all the vintage Harleys who used to pay stupid money for restoration work." The conversation sparked something that had been dormant in Hawk for 3 years. The memory of pride and craftsmanship, of creating beauty from broken things, of being someone whose skills were valued and respected. It felt foreign and familiar at the same time, like putting on clothes that had once fit perfectly but now seemed to belong to someone else entirely. Anna watched the adults planning and scheming with the patient attention of someone who'd learned that her fate was often decided by forces beyond her control. Thunder sensed her emotional state and moved closer, his massive head lowering until she could rest her small hand on his forehead. The bull's steady breathing and warm presence provided an anchor of calm in the storm of adult anxiety and desperate problem-solving. "Uncle Hawk," she said quietly, interrupting the increasingly animated discussion of contacts and possibilities, "are you going to leave again?" The question stopped all conversation, its innocent directness cutting through layers of planning and hope to the core fear that had haunted Anna since recognizing her father's friend. Adults had a way of making promises they couldn't keep, of building hope that crumbled when reality proved too difficult to bear. Hawk knelt beside Anna's wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level with the same careful attention he'd once shown when teaching her to carve wood and call birds. "Anna, I can't promise that I won't mess up," he said, his honesty raw and unpolished. "I'm still pretty broken, and broken people sometimes make mistakes, but I can promise that I won't run away again. Whatever happens, however hard it gets, I'll stay and face it." The words carried weight because they acknowledged weakness rather than claiming strength, offered commitment rather than guarantees. Anna studied his face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read adult emotions for signs of truth or deception. "Daddy used to say that being brave isn't about not being scared," she said finally. "It's about doing what's right even when you're scared." The simple wisdom, delivered in her father's words, hit Hawk like a physical blow. Michael had indeed said those exact words, usually when explaining why he was returning to Afghanistan for another deployment, despite the nightmares and anxiety that had followed his first tour. The memory of his friend's courage in the face of fear served as both inspiration and condemnation. Inspiration for what was possible, condemnation for how far Hawk had fallen from those ideals, Doctor. Whitehorse cleared her throat gently, bringing the group's attention back to the immediate crisis. "I'll do what I can to buy you time," she said, "but Thursday morning is the absolute deadline. After that, we'll be looking at emergency intervention with no guarantee of success." As they left the veterinary clinic, Thunder walking carefully beside Anna's wheelchair despite his hidden pain, Hawk felt the familiar weight of impossible odds pressing down on his shoulders. But for the first time in 3 years, the weight felt like a challenge rather than a burden, a problem to be solved rather than a reality to be escaped. The man who'd once promised Michael Crowfeather to protect his family was finally ready to discover whether that promise could still be kept. The call came at 4:17 a.m. on Thursday morning, jerking Hawk from the first nightmare-free sleep he'd experienced in months. His phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand of the cheap motel room where he'd spent the night making desperate calls to every contact from his former life, reaching across years of burned bridges and broken promises to find anyone who might remember Jackson Redstone as something other than a cautionary tale. "Hawk, it's Sarah." Her voice carried a weight that immediately sent ice through his veins. "Anna's had a seizure. A bad one. We're at the hospital in Rapid City, and the doctors, they're saying things I don't want to believe." The words hit him like shrapnel, each syllable carrying the weight of his worst fears made manifest. Thunder's injury had compromised his ability to detect Anna's seizures in their earliest stages, and the stress of the past few days had apparently triggered the kind of neurological storm that her medications were designed to prevent, but couldn't always stop. "How bad?" Hawk asked, already reaching for his clothes with hands that shook despite his efforts to maintain control. "She's been unconscious for 6 hours. Sarah replied, her voice breaking slightly before she regained composure. "The doctors are talking about intubation, about machines to keep her breathing. They're saying that without Thunder's early warning system, the next seizure could—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Hawk understood the implications. Anna's rare form of epilepsy had always carried the risk of sudden death, a medical reality that Thunder's specialized training had been designed to mitigate. Without the bull's supernatural ability to detect chemical changes that preceded seizures, Anna was essentially defenseless against her own neurological system. "I'm coming," Hawk said, shoving his feet into boots and grabbing his motorcycle keys. "How's Thunder?" "In pain but stable." Dr. Whitehorse has him on medication to manage the worst of it, but she says we're running out of time. If we can't get him into surgery by this afternoon, the internal bleeding will require emergency intervention. The cruel irony wasn't lost on either of them. Thunder's injury was preventing him from protecting Anna, while Anna's crisis was making it impossible to focus on Thunder's needs. They were trapped in a vicious cycle where each problem made the other worse with no clear solution in sight. Hawk's motorcycle roared to life in the motel parking lot, the familiar rumble of the Harley's engine providing a soundtrack for the desperate ride through pre-dawn darkness toward Rapid City Regional Hospital. As he rode, his phone buzzed with text messages from Tommy and Rico, updates on the frantic networking effort they'd undertaken on his behalf. Gary Ironcloud says yes, emergency welding job, cash payment, but you need to be in Billings by noon, read one message. Henderson wants to meet about restoration project. Vintage 1947 Knucklehead needs complete rebuild paying $15,000, read another. The offers represented more money than Hawk had seen in 3 years, but they also required him to leave Anna when she needed him most. The old Jackson Redstone would have taken the money and run, convincing himself that financial contribution was the same as emotional support. But the man speeding through South Dakota darkness understood that some debts couldn't be paid with money alone. He arrived at the hospital to find Sarah sitting vigil in the pediatric intensive care unit, her weathered hands folded in prayer while machines monitored Anna's vital signs with electronic precision. The sight of the small figure dwarfed by medical equipment and surrounded by the cold efficiency of modern medicine struck Hawk like a physical blow. "Any change?" he asked, settling into the chair beside Sarah with the quiet respect of someone entering sacred space. "She opened her eyes once, about an hour ago," Sarah replied, her voice hoarse from crying and exhaustion. "Asked for Thunder. When I told her he was at the clinic, she said, 'He's hurting too, isn't he?' And then fell back asleep." The child's intuitive understanding of her guardian's condition, even while struggling with her own medical crisis, demonstrated the depth of the bond that connected them. Anna and Thunder shared something that transcended typical human-animal relationships, a connection so profound that each one's pain affected the other in ways that medical science struggled to explain. Dr. Jennifer Clearwater, Elena's sister and Anna's primary neurologist, emerged from the ICU with the grave expression of someone bearing news that would fundamentally alter a family's understanding of their situation. Her resemblance to Chief Clearwater was unmistakable, the same sharp intelligence and steady presence that had made the diner owner a respected community leader. "Mrs. Crowfeather, Mr. Redstone," she acknowledged them with professional courtesy before delivering her assessment. "Anna's condition has deteriorated more rapidly than we anticipated. The seizure caused significant brain swelling, and her neurological responses are becoming increasingly unstable." Sarah's face drained of color as the implications became clear. "What are you saying, Doctor?" "I'm saying that without Thunder's intervention capabilities, Anna is facing a life-threatening situation that could deteriorate rapidly," Dr. Clearwater replied with careful honesty. "Her seizures are increasing in both frequency and intensity, and our medications aren't providing adequate control." Hawk felt the familiar rage building in his chest, but this time it was directed at himself rather than external targets. His selfish moment of PTSD-fueled violence had created a cascade of consequences that now threatened the life of an innocent child. The weight of that responsibility felt like drowning in slow motion, each breath becoming more difficult as the reality of his actions settled in his consciousness. "What if we could get Thunder back to full health?" Hawk asked, his voice tight with desperation. "Would that make a difference?" Dr. Clearwater hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Theoretically, yes. Thunder's seizure detection abilities have been crucial to Anna's stability over the past 3 years, but given his current condition and the time required for surgical recovery, we're looking at weeks before he could resume full service duties. Anna doesn't have weeks, Sarah said flatly, stating the obvious truth that everyone was avoiding. The conversation was interrupted by Hawk's phone ringing with a call from an unknown Montana number. He almost declined the call, but something made him answer instead. "Jackson, this is Robert Henderson from Bozeman. Your friend Rico gave me your number, said you might be available for some emergency work." Hawk stepped into the hallway, not wanting to disturb the ICU's atmosphere with business discussions. "Mr. Henderson, I appreciate the call, but I'm dealing with a family emergency right now." "That's exactly why I'm calling," Henderson replied, his voice carrying an urgency that captured Hawk's attention. Rico explained the situation with the little girl and her service bull. "My granddaughter has epilepsy too, uses a seizure detection dog that cost us a fortune. I understand what you're going through." The unexpected connection shifted the entire dynamic of the conversation. Henderson wasn't just offering work, he was offering understanding from someone who'd faced similar challenges with a disabled grandchild. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" Hawk asked, his mind racing through possibilities. "I've got 3 restoration projects that have been sitting in my garage for months, waiting for someone with your skills," Henderson replied. "Premium work, premium pay. If you can get here by tomorrow morning and work straight through the weekend, I can have $25,000 in your hands by Monday morning." The figure was more than enough to cover Thunder's surgery and ongoing care, with money left over for Anna's medical expenses. But it would require leaving immediately, abandoning Anna during her crisis to chase financial solutions that might come too late to matter. "Mr. Henderson," Hawk said slowly, "what if I told you there was a way to help my friend's granddaughter while also helping yours? What if we could do something that would benefit children with epilepsy everywhere?" The conversation that followed would later be remembered as the moment when everything changed, when desperate necessity collided with unexpected opportunity to create possibilities that none of them had imagined. As Hawk talked, outlining an idea that was equal parts brilliant and impossible, Sarah watched Anna's sleeping face through the ICU window, unaware that her world was about to shift in ways that would test every assumption she'd made about hope, healing, and the power of promises finally kept. The revelation came not through dramatic confrontation, but through a worn manila envelope that Chief Clearwater brought to the hospital at dawn on Friday morning, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he placed it on the table beside Anna's hospital bed. Sarah looked up from her vigil with eyes reddened by sleepless nights and endless worry, while Hawk stood frozen by the window, his phone still pressed to his ear as he finalized arrangements with Henderson that might save them all, if they weren't already too late. "There's something you need to know," Chief said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of secrets that had been buried for too long. "Something about why Anna and Thunder share such a deep connection, and why that connection might be the key to saving them both." Inside the envelope were documents that Sarah had never seen before, medical records from Anna's birth, genetic test results that her son Michael had requested but never lived to fully understand, and most importantly, a letter written in Michael's careful handwriting that revealed the true depth of his planning for Anna's future. "My dearest Anna," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to explain the extraordinary gift that was given to you at birth. The seizures that began when you were 18 months old aren't just a medical condition. They're part of a genetic pattern that appears once in several generations among our people, marking those who will become bridges between the human and animal worlds." Sarah's breath caught as she read words that challenged everything she thought she understood about her great-granddaughter's condition. The medical community had classified Anna's epilepsy as a rare neurological disorder, but Michael had apparently discovered something deeper, a genetic trait that had appeared in their family line for centuries, passed down through women who became legendary for their ability to communicate with animals. Thunder isn't just a service bull, the letter continued. He carries genetic markers that complement Anna's own, creating a symbiotic relationship that goes far beyond training or conditioning. When I found him as a calf, genetic testing revealed that his bloodline descended from the sacred herds that our ancestors considered messengers from the spirit world. The connection between Anna and Thunder is biological, spiritual, and potentially powerful enough to change how the world understands the relationship between humans and animals. Hawk moved closer to read over Sarah's shoulder, his conversation with Henderson forgotten as the implications of Michael's words became clear. "He's saying that Anna and Thunder are genetically matched," he said slowly, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief. Chief Clearwater nodded, his expression grave but hopeful. "That's not the most important part," he said. "Keep reading." The letter's next section revealed Michael's real purpose in arranging Thunder's expensive training, not just to help Anna manage her disability, but to prepare both of them for a role that could revolutionize treatment for children with seizure disorders worldwide. The research I've been funding through the University of Colorado is developing a new approach to seizure detection that combines traditional animal training with genetic compatibility testing, Michael had written. Anna and Thunder represent the first successful pairing in what could become a breakthrough treatment program. If their partnership proves as successful as early indicators suggest, they could help establish breeding and training programs that would provide genetically matched service animals for epileptic children everywhere. The revelation transformed everything they thought they knew about Anna's situation. She wasn't just a disabled child struggling with medical bills. She was potentially the key to helping thousands of other children who faced similar challenges. Thunder wasn't just her personal service animal, he was proof of concept for an entirely new approach to medical intervention. The university research grant, Chief continued, pulling additional documents from the envelope, it's still active. Michael set up a trust fund that was supposed to support Anna's care and continue the research program. The money's been sitting in an account for 3 years, waiting for someone to claim it. Sarah stared at the bank statements and legal documents with mounting amazement. The trust fund contained nearly $200,000, more than enough to cover Thunder's surgery, Anna's ongoing medical needs, and the continuation of research that could benefit countless other families. "Why didn't you tell us?" Hawk asked, his voice tight with emotions he couldn't quite identify. 3 years we've been struggling and this money was just sitting there? Chief's expression grew pained as he explained the bureaucratic nightmare that had kept the funds frozen. Michael died before he could finalize the paperwork. The university lawyers couldn't locate his designated trustee, and Sarah was too overwhelmed with Anna's immediate needs to navigate the legal system. The money's been tied up in probate court while Anna suffered. The designated trustee, according to the documents, was Jackson Redstone, a detail that hit Hawk like a physical blow. Michael had planned for Hawk to manage the trust fund, to oversee Anna's care and the research program that could help other children. Even from beyond the grave, Michael had been trying to give his friend a purpose, a way to transform his own pain into something meaningful. "I was supposed to be managing this all along," Hawk said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Michael trusted me with his daughter's future, and I ran away instead." The weight of the revelation was overwhelming, but it also provided clarity about what needed to happen next. The trust fund would cover all of Anna's immediate needs, but accessing it would require Hawk to accept his role as trustee and commit to the long-term responsibilities that Michael had envisioned. Anna stirred in her hospital bed, her eyes fluttering open as consciousness returned slowly. The first word she spoke was "Thunder," delivered with the urgency of someone whose dreams had been filled with images of her guardian's pain. "He's okay, sweetheart," Sarah said quickly, though the reassurance felt hollow given Thunder's deteriorating condition. "Uncle Hawk is taking care of everything." Anna's gaze fixed on Hawk with startling intensity, as if she could see through to the core of his struggle with the responsibilities he'd been avoiding. "The dreams," she said quietly, her voice still thick with medication and exhaustion. "I keep having dreams about Daddy. He says Thunder and I have important work to do, but we can't do it alone." The child's words carried an eerie accuracy that sent chills through the adults gathered around her bed. Anna had always demonstrated an uncanny ability to sense things beyond her years, but her reference to important work seemed to echo Michael's letter with impossible precision. Dr. Clearwater chose that moment to enter with test results that would determine Anna's immediate future. Her expression was cautiously optimistic as she reviewed the charts, noting improvements in Anna's neurological responses that couldn't be entirely explained by medication adjustments. "Anna's condition has stabilized somewhat," she reported, "but she's not out of danger. The seizure activity could resume at any time, and without Thunder's detection capabilities, we'd have very little warning." Hawk made his decision with the sudden clarity that had once made him an effective soldier. "Dr. Clearwater, what would you need to perform Thunder's surgery immediately? What would it take to get him back to Anna as quickly as possible?" The veterinarian had been waiting for this conversation, had already prepared contingency plans for emergency intervention. 8 hours in surgery, 2 days of intensive recovery, another week of careful monitoring. If everything goes perfectly, Thunder could be back to limited service duties within 10 days. "Do it," Hawk said without hesitation. "Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. Michael left me in charge of Anna's care, and I'm done failing at that responsibility." The decision set in motion a cascade of activity that would reshape all their lives. Legal papers were signed, activating the trust fund. Surgical arrangements were made for Thunder's immediate treatment, and research protocols were established to document the unique partnership between Anna and her genetically matched guardian. As medical teams prepared for Thunder's surgery, Anna reached out from her hospital bed to take Hawk's hand with surprising strength. "Uncle Hawk," she said, her voice clear despite her medical condition, "Daddy told me in the dream that being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you careful, and careful people protect the things that matter most." The child's wisdom, delivered with such simple conviction, finally broke through the last of Hawk's emotional barriers. For the first time since Michael's death, he allowed himself to cry, not from self-pity or guilt, but from relief at finally understanding that redemption was possible, that promises could be kept even after they'd been broken, and that love could survive even the deepest failures. Outside Anna's hospital room window, the first snow of the season began to fall over the Black Hills, covering the sacred landscape in pristine white that seemed to promise new beginnings and second chances for those brave enough to accept them. The surgery began at dawn on Saturday morning, with Dr. Whitehorse leading a team of veterinary specialists in what would become the most closely watched animal medical procedure in South Dakota history. Thunder lay unconscious on the operating table, his massive frame dwarfed by the array of monitors and equipment that tracked his vital signs with the same precision typically reserved for human patients. In the adjacent building, Anna slept fitfully in her hospital bed, her own monitors showing the subtle stress patterns that indicated her body's awareness of Thunder's crisis, even while her conscious mind rested. Hawk had spent the night in the hospital chapel, a small interfaith space that served patients and families of all backgrounds with quiet dignity and universal symbols of hope. He wasn't particularly religious, but the silence provided refuge from the storm of emotions that had been building since he'd accepted his role as trustee of Michael's legacy. The weight of responsibility felt different now, not the crushing burden of guilt he'd carried for 3 years, but the purposeful heaviness of meaningful work that connected him to something larger than his own damaged psyche. Sarah had remained at Anna's bedside throughout the night, her weathered hands working steadily on a traditional star quilt that would eventually grace Thunder's recovery stall. The rhythmic motion of needle through fabric provided both meditation and practical purpose, each stitch representing a prayer for healing and a tangible expression of hope that refused to acknowledge the possibility of failure. The first update came at 10:30 a.m., delivered by Dr. Whitehorse's surgical assistant with the cautious optimism of someone who understood that good news could turn tragic without warning. "The first rib has been successfully repaired," she reported to the small crowd that had gathered in the veterinary clinic's waiting room. "Dr. Whitehorse says Thunder's responding well to anesthesia, and there haven't been any unexpected complications." Chief Clearwater had arrived with coffee and homemade fry bread from the diner, understanding that vigils required sustenance for both body and spirit. Tommy and Rico flanked Hawk like protective brothers, their loyalty unwavering despite the chaos he'd brought into their cross-country journey. Deputy Martinez stopped by during her patrol rounds, bringing updates from the reservation where news of Thunder's surgery had spread through the informal networks that connected every household to every other. "The whole community's praying," she reported, accepting a cup of Chief's coffee with grateful hands. "Mrs. Clearwater has organized prayer circles in 3 different languages. Father Martinez is holding special services at the Catholic Church. Even the evangelical congregation in Pine Ridge is including Thunder in their healing prayers." The interfaith support reflected the unique way that Anna and Thunder had transcended traditional boundaries, becoming symbols of hope that resonated across cultural and religious lines. Their story had touched something universal, the relationship between protector and protected, the bond that connected all living things, the possibility that love could overcome even the deepest wounds. Anna woke at noon with the sudden alertness of someone receiving important news through channels that medical science couldn't measure. "Thunder's okay," she announced to Sarah with complete certainty, her young face bright with relief that seemed premature given the ongoing surgery. "He's dreaming about running in green fields, and his ribs don't hurt anymore." Dr. Clearwater, who had been monitoring Anna's condition throughout the morning, noted the child's improved neurological responses with professional interest and personal amazement. "Her brain activity has stabilized significantly," she told Hawk when he arrived from the chapel. "It's as if her system knows that Thunder is going to recover." The second surgical update arrived at 2:15 p.m. with news that the delicate work of repairing intercostal muscle damage had been completed successfully. "Both ribs are now properly aligned and stabilized," Dr. Whitehorse reported personally, her surgical scrubs still damp with perspiration from hours of precision work. "The internal bleeding has stopped, and we're seeing excellent tissue response to the repair procedures." Hawk felt something release in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying since the moment his boot connected with Thunder's ribs. The bull would recover, would return to his role as Anna's guardian, would continue the important work that Michael had envisioned. The cascade of consequences that had begun with Hawk's moment of rage was finally resolving into something that resembled justice, healing, and hope. The final phase of surgery focused on ensuring that Thunder's recovery would restore his full range of motion and strength. Dr. Whitehorse had consulted with specialists in equine sports medicine, adapting techniques developed for racehorses to address the unique needs of a service bull whose work required both physical capability and emotional stability. At 4:45 p.m., Dr. Whitehorse emerged from the surgical suite with the exhausted satisfaction of someone who had successfully navigated a complex challenge. "Thunder is stable and recovering," she announced to the assembled crowd, The surgery was successful, and barring any unexpected complications, he should make a full recovery within 2 to 3 weeks. The relief was palpable, expressed through tears, embraces, and the kind of quiet gratitude that follows answered prayers. But the real test would come when Thunder awakened and demonstrated whether his remarkable bond with Anna had survived the trauma of injury and surgery. That test came 6 hours later, when Thunder's eyes opened in the recovery stall, and his first movement was to lift his massive head toward the direction of the hospital where Anna waited. Dr. Whitehorse had never seen anything like it. An animal emerging from anesthesia with such focused purpose, such clear awareness of obligations that transcended his own comfort. "He knows," she said simply, watching Thunder struggle to his feet despite the post-surgical pain that would have kept most animals immobilized. "He knows Anna needs him." The reunion took place at midnight in Anna's hospital room, after Dr. Clearwater had granted special permission for Thunder to visit despite health department regulations that typically prohibited large animals in medical facilities. Thunder moved slowly but steadily down the hallway, his steps careful but determined, his eyes fixed on the room where his charge waited. Anna was awake and alert when Thunder's massive head appeared in her doorway, his presence immediately triggering the monitoring equipment to register improved vital signs and decreased stress indicators. The child's face lit up with joy that seemed to illuminate the sterile hospital room, her small arms reaching toward her guardian with the urgency of someone greeting a beloved family member after a long separation. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered as Thunder carefully positioned himself beside her bed, his massive frame somehow managing not to disturb the array of medical equipment that surrounded her. "I never stopped believing you'd come back." Thunder's response was to gently rest his head on the edge of Anna's bed, close enough for her to stroke his forehead while maintaining the respectful distance his training had taught him to observe in medical settings. The bull's eyes, bright with intelligence and unmistakable relief, seemed to communicate everything that words couldn't express about loyalty, love, and the unbreakable bonds that connect kindred spirits. Hawk watched the reunion from the doorway, understanding finally that some promises required a lifetime to fulfill, but were worth every moment of struggle along the way. Michael's faith in him had never been misplaced. It had simply been waiting for Hawk to discover the man his friend had always known him to be. As the monitor showed Anna's vital signs stabilizing for the first time in days, and Thunder settled into his familiar guardian position despite his own healing wounds, the hospital room became a sanctuary where broken things found wholeness and love proved stronger than every force that had tried to tear them apart. Dear friends, this story reminds us that it's never too late to honor our promises or heal our deepest wounds. Like Hawk, many of us carry burdens from our past, times we failed those we loved, dreams we abandoned, relationships we let slip away. But Anna and Thunder teach us that love doesn't keep score of our failures. It simply waits patiently for us to remember who we were meant to be. In our golden years, we have the wisdom to see that every setback was preparing us for our greatest comeback. Every broken promise was teaching us the true value of keeping our word. The bonds that matter most, with family, community, and the gentle creatures who share our world, can survive any storm if we have the courage to fight for them. What promise from your past is calling you to make things right? How has an unexpected friendship or partnership changed your life when you needed it most? Share your stories below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.